Style for Life. I'm Stephanie Rumble, fashion stylist, accountability coach, and your guide to feeling good in your body and your clothes. Based in Christchurch, New Zealand, I bring over 3 decades of experience in fashion, fitness, and wellness to help you feel strong, stylish, and self-assured. Together we'll explore the emotional, physical, and practical sides of style, because true confidence starts from within. No matter your age or size, you deserve to feel confident and show up as the best version of you. I truly believe this. This is Style for Life. Kia ora whanau and welcome to the Style for Life podcast today. I just want all of you to know too that all of the podcasts get translated into a blog. So if you haven't checked out my blog, I have a couple of amazing people who are doing this work with me, and the blog gets posted on my website, which is Bright Red NZ, and also there's often images and a whole lot of visuals on there. So if you are a listener but you want to see some visuals, do head across and look at the blog. It's particularly useful for an episode like last week's where I spoke about spring summer fashion trends, which I'm not going to speak about this week. I'm going to speak about something entirely different, because next week needs to be about races fashion, which is coming up in a couple of weeks' time here in Christchurch. So we are in the midst of spring here in Christchurch, New Zealand, which means that generally the weather's warmer, but it's been freezing today. So we have a lot of trans-seasonal weather. We have a lot of changeable weather. We have lots of putting on clothes and taking them off, not entirely, but taking off layers, and wearing something summery one day, wearing something wintry the next. So you're talking about the trends. Hopefully gave you a few insights into what will be working across that seasonal dressing, and also what you might like to look out for in the shops. But today, the podcast is about something entirely different. I'm going to talk to you today about how to manage conflict, either at work or at home. So for those of you who don't know, I'm just going to give you some background on how and why I'm talking about this, and then I will go into some techniques and some background on it so that you perhaps can get some insights that might help you in your life or your work. So first of all, in the lockdown of 2020 here in New Zealand, I was not working because obviously work stopped for everybody, and my work was mainly face-to-face education at the time. So I wanted to get into doing some other work online, and the company I was working for at the time got commissioned by the government health and safety lead to prepare some training in conflict de-escalation. So I put my hand up, and very luckily for me, I was asked to do this work, and I did this work and developed some conflict de-escalation training. And over the course of COVID and then following in the next few years, I delivered many of these courses to many different agencies, government agencies, and all sorts of other agencies as well. So it was a very busy, popular course, which had many iterations. It had a lot of tailoring and development, and awesome. It was awesome. And then fast forward a few years later, that company shut down in the way that I'd been working for it. So I revamped and changed the course around, and also got upskilled and did a bit more work in the area, and have also been delivering some training in this area. So I have delivered conflict de-escalation training, which is what I've workplace conflict de-escalation training, which I've rebranded it as, and done a lot of research and development over the last few years. So I sort of became a specialist through research, through development, through experience, and also through working with so many different companies who had so many challenges around their own conflict, and kind of learning how to deal with it. So yeah, it's been really, really interesting. I work pretty much in the education space. So for those of you who are wondering, if I go in and do a wee bit of conflict management within organisations, I have done a wee bit of that too for some organisations, where I've gone in and actually helped them work out some conflict where people have been struggling to get along with other people. Not mediation, I'm not a mediator, but have gone in and used some of the techniques and tools which I'm going to share with you today to help you in this space. So very much it's been evolution. It still is an evolving topic, an evolving area. And I feel very privileged to, again, I've probably delivered nearly 300 of these courses since 2020. So it was a long time. Might have been 2021, actually. I'm just trying to remember when the lockdown was. My brain's kind of not there, but I know I did it for a long time, and it was very, very busy and successful while I was working for this company. But anyway, and now I'm out on my own. I still do a bit of it, and have done quite a bit this year, and have developed, as I said, many iterations and variations to work for my clients. So for those of you who don't know, I also do work in this education space. I work primarily in leadership, wellness and conflict education. So I have worked in the past in health and safety education. So you possibly don't know me in this context, and stepped away from health and safety education in 2023 when we had a change in government and my contracts were no longer renewed. So have worked and moved last year into doing a lot of leadership education and staying with my conflict de-escalation. So it's been really interesting, and I absolutely love it. And all of it ties together into my personal values, which are contribution to others, connection with others, gratitude, health, wellness, and vitality. So they all sit in my values space. So what are we going to talk about today? So there's 3 areas I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about, firstly, when you're in a situation of conflict, how you firstly manage yourself, because you can't deal with a conflict situation if you're wound up. So I'm going to talk about how you manage yourself. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how you might be able to help the other person or deal with them if you want to de-escalate that a little bit, or how you respond to them. And then thirdly, I'm going to talk about what happens afterwards. So the 3 different areas: you, them, and after. So firstly, if we think about you. So when you're in a situation where there is conflict, or where something starts to feel challenging and upset you, there's 5 steps here. The first thing you need to do is identify what your triggers are. So what's actually triggered you in this moment? Like, has someone shouted at you? Have they sworn at you? Have they made a humiliating personal comment? Have they said something offensive? Have they been racist? Have they been sexist? Have they done anything that's physically or verbally triggering? So sometimes it might not be any of those verbal signs I just talked about. It might be a physical sign. They might have stepped into your personal space. They might have taken on a threatening posture. They might have held up something that looked a little bit threatening, like a weapon. They may have used a dog to intimidate you. They may have used a position or a body language indicator that feels threatening and feels like it's going to making you feel triggered. So the very first thing is, in that moment when you start to feel the conflict brewing or the interaction starting to escalate, it's like, what's been triggering me in this incident? So how have I responded to this? So for example, and this comes from your childhood. So it comes from your childhood and comes from your history and your past. There's going to be things in your history and your past that trigger you, that end up meaning that you start feeling really wound up. So conflict is defined as when 2 people don't agree on something, and when there becomes an upset. So you have a trigger, yeah? And the trigger is usually stimulated from something from your past that has caused you to have a physical or psychological response. Now, the physical response might be you just get hot. I personally get really hot when something triggers me. Or heart rate might rise, you might feel like you're going bright red, you might flush bright red, you might get an increased heart rate, you might feel nauseous in the stomach, you might find that your breathing rate increases, so you start breathing in the top of your lungs. All of those things might happen. Again, it might be just really subtle. Or you might get a psychological feeling that you've been triggered, like, oh, I feel a bit upset by that, oh, that's making me feel angry, oh, that's making me feel. So the first thing is identify your trigger. So an example I was going to give before is, if someone shouts and swears at me, I'm likely to feel triggered, right? So I will start to feel a little triggered. And if someone is really overly defensive with me, I might start feeling triggered as well. So, and probably that comes from my past. Without wanting to throw anyone from my past under the bus. You know, that's part of what I've picked up in my life, right? So I find those 2 things triggering. I also find things like Sexual racial harassment really triggering as well. So if those things happen, I start feeling very indignant. So everyone is different. So identify in that moment, what about that interaction is making you feel a little bit uneasy, a little bit upset, right? So that's the very first thing you want to know. That's number one, what's triggered you. Number two is, where can you feel yourself going in this moment? So there's three places you could go, and these are called amygdala hijack. So that's when the amygdala, which is the tiny almond-shaped piece in the middle of your brain, which is the place where we generate emotion or we respond to triggers and emotion is generated from. This amygdala starts to overfire and it takes over the prefrontal cortex or the frontal lobe of the brain. Now, what that means is that we lose the ability to have rational thought. Because that frontal cortex or frontal lobe in the brain, what it does is it helps us to make decisions about our emotions. So if we think about, say, a teenager or a young person or a baby or a child, they find it really hard sometimes to emotionally regulate. And that's because that frontal lobe or prefrontal cortex hasn't yet developed. So the average age for a female's brain to fully develop is around the age of 22. For a male, it's around the age of 27. Yeah? So again, a younger person might struggle for emotion regulation, even with a very small amount of trigger, right? For us as adults, hopefully we're going to be able to manage that a bit better, and I'm going to teach you some techniques to do that. Step one is identifying your triggers. Step two is identifying which type of amygdala hijack you are falling into in that moment of conflict or escalation. So the first thing would be, the first area of amygdala hijack, there's three here, and there's others, but I'm going to work with three because they're the three most recognized. The first is you slip into fight mode. You'll probably do one of the three at the time. Fight mode is where someone says something you don't like and you just want to answer straight back. You just want to fight straight back. You just want to give the answer. You want to be in the argument, in the moment, in the responding. Like your brain is just responding verbal diarrhea straight out. That's the fight, right? So if you're in that moment, none of these are wrong or right? So that's fight. The next one is flight. Flight is where you're in the argument or in the moment of conflict and you just want to exit. So you just want to walk away, exit, leave, get out of the situation. Like, I'm done, I want out. So, or if you can't physically remove yourself, in the moment you feel the overwhelming urge to change the subject. Something usually quite irrelevant, to get away from that difficult and challenging conversation. Or the third one, which happens, is that you might freeze. So what that looks like is this. Usually it's silence, means your brain can't move forward to say what it needs to say, right? So fight, flight, or freeze. So the second way to manage your own emotions is to recognize which one of these you're slipping into. Is it fight, flight, or freeze? Okay, so if you're slipping into, say, I would be likely to slip into fight. So if somebody shouts and swears at me, my immediate response would possibly be to want to say something back. Now, in a personal situation, that's what would happen. For me, in a work situation, I'd probably sit back and say nothing for a minute and freeze, right? Because I'd be so shocked that someone would speak to me like that at work, because it's out of my usual context, right? So it would take quite a lot of bravery for me to speak up in a work situation, which I would now, especially the advantage of age has given me that. So what's the trigger? What are we slipping into? Are we slipping into fight, flight, or freeze? Okay, so and you'll do all of these two steps in a very short space of time. So it might be in a 10-second slot. Someone shouted and sworn at me. I feel myself wanting to fight. So then the next thing you need to do is you need to make sure your frontal lobe is switched back on, because your amygdala, which is going into fight, flight, or freeze, is trying to take over your frontal lobe, or your prefrontal cortex, and actually turn it off. so that your brain goes into full emotion mode. And that's not good, amygdala hijack, because you don't make great decisions when you're in that mode. So remember, the young people might do this. If you're drunk or high, you might have less emotion regulation. Emotion regulation can also be tricky and challenging if you've got confounding mental health conditions that influence this. Also might be a problem if you had a brain injury or you're suffering from age-related brain illness as well. There's all sorts of things that affect your ability for your frontal lobe to work, but I'm talking here about a trigger that causes your brain to go into amygdala hijack and not let the frontal lobe work, right? So you want to, first of all, go, someone shouted and sworn at me. I feel myself going into fight. Then the third thing that you would do, in that moment, you need to decide to employ a technique to bring yourself back and bring your frontal lobe back online. Now, I'm going to give you 3 techniques here because there's a lot of information in this particular podcast. And if you're listening, you'll be, oh my gosh, I'm listening. How do I get all this info? Remember, all the podcasts get transcribed on the app, so you'll be able to see all this information. So the first thing to do is to breathe. Now, I know that sounds so super simple and like really like basic and like, oh yes, Steph, we're breathing now. You are, but conscious breathing, particularly with a focus on the outgoing breath, makes a huge difference. So when you breathe, you just don't want to just go, right? That's not enough. And you don't want to do it overly obviously like I just did. You want to do it so it's slow and controlled. So it will be something like this. Breathe in. Hold. Slow exhale. So I say use the 9-second rule. Breathe in for 3 counts. Hold for 3 counts and exhale for 3 counts, or even better, breathe in for 3 counts, exhale for 6 counts. Controlling the outgoing breath and controlling your breathing helps bring your brain back into a basic function of counting. The oxygen in your body reoxygenates your body and your brain, which has a calming effect. Yeah, and slowing down that breathing has a really good effect on your overall well-being. So that particular technique of breathing, in for 3, hold, and then exhale, or in for 3, exhale for 6, is really good. 9-second rule. Okay? So oxygen calms, and then having the counting helps the brain to slow and reflect back as well. And it creates silence too. So silence is really important in conflict so that you can control and manage your emotions. What you need to be doing here is taking the emotion away from the conversation, because conflict's about emotion, right? And if you want to get the emotion out, you have to recognize it and control it. So the first one is to breathe. The second technique that I'm going to give you, and there's a whole lot of techniques here, the second technique I'm going to give you is to actually ground. Now, I was doing some reading on grounding today, and that's like, okay, what can I feel right now? Like I can feel my bum on the seat, I can feel my feet in my shoes, I can feel like my jacket's on, it feels comfortable. What can I hear? I can hear my own voice. What can I smell? Well, nothing, because I'm in my office and there's nothing to smell. And then what can I hear? What can I see? What can I smell? And then what can I feel with my feet in my shoes? So just bringing yourself back to your senses can be a really good way of bringing your frontal lobe back into action as well. Okay, the next one that you can do is self-soothing. So you can put your hand on your chest like so. Just placing your hand on your body brings back the mind-body connection, which can help switch the frontal lobe back into action. And then if that's not where you feel the discomfort or the pressure of conflict or upset, you might want to put your hand across your arm across your stomach, just like that. Personally, I find that the chest one's better for me because I tend to hold tension here. Some people get in the gut. Or if you just want to give yourself a hug, just letting your shoulders drop, that can also be another good way of allowing your body to relax and allowing you to come back to the moment and bring yourself into the present. Okay, so that's 3 techniques. 1 is to identify your triggers. 2 is to figure out whether you're going into fight, flight, or freeze. And 3 is to use a calming technique, of which I've described 3 calming techniques. We've described breathing, I've described grounding, and I've described self-soothing. Okay, there's a whole lot of others. That's just 3 to start you on this in this relatively short space of time in this journey. Okay, so once you've done that, step 4 in the process of managing yourself in conflict is to empathize with the other person. That's really difficult when you feel annoyed with them. So really difficult, particularly if you feel that they've wound you up, right? Remember, no one winds you up. You choose to be wound up by what they're saying, right? So if you're feeling yourself in this situation, remember you're trying to take the emotion out of it. So you just would empathize with them. I'm sorry to hear this has happened to you. Sorry you're in this situation. That's all you need to say. So a couple of things that you acknowledge the upset. And the other thing that is also works really, really, really well, and again, in conflict it's really difficult, is for you to hold your calm. So you to hold your calm. Now, using silence is a good way to do this. It's not silence that's so much that you're withholding to dominate. It's just silence that is enough to bring the whole situation down, right? So can you bring the situation down and make sure that other person might talk, but you don't. You want to be the behavior that you want them to mimic, right? So you want to be the behavior you want them to mimic. So remain calm. And you can only do that with the previous 4 steps. Yeah? Do you understand how important it is to have you in this equation? So you in this equation is about making sure that you are looking after your emotions and your behavior first, because if you don't do that, the conflict's just going to get out of hand, right? So how do you manage yourself? So, as I've said, the 5 steps. Identify your trigger. Work out which amygdala hijack you're in. Use a technique to calm yourself, of which we identified 3. Number 1 was breathing. Number 2 was grounding. Number 3 was self-soothing. The 4th technique in self-de-escalation or self-conflict management is to empathize with the other person. And the 5th is to remain calm. Okay, so all of that adds together to have you manage you. So when you've done that, and that all will happen in about 10 seconds, and I've spent 20 minutes talking about it, oh my goodness, then the next thing you want to try and do is you want to try and see if you can help the other person to communicate better. Now, it may or may not work, right? But this is also some techniques you can use when you are managing conflict and when you are trying to help de-escalate somebody who's quite wound up, right? So the first thing is to understand how they're communicating with you. So are they communicating in a way that's really aggressive, or are they being passive aggressive? So first of all, which of those 2 ways are you observing? So aggressive is when somebody is, how do I define this? They are putting out what they want and taking no regard for what you need, right? There's a difference between assertive and aggressive. Assertive is where you actually state your needs, but you consider the needs of others. That's assertive. Aggressive is where you put out your needs and you just don't care about what anyone else thinks. That's aggressive, or how it's going to impact them. So they're behaving like that, and that's creating the conflict. Or passive aggressive is when they say one thing and do another. So they might say, oh, I'm great, I'm really good, and they sound not great and not good, and they look cross, and you can see their faces like, you know, not in a great situation. So that's just a couple of ways to think about how your communication is and how they're communicating with you. So first of all, identify that. Then you want to try a couple of grabber techniques just to pull in the moment to try and get the person back into the space where they can communicate with you, because you want to be able to communicate with them rather than having this head-butting conflict that's actually not allowing you to move forward. Now, some conflict's okay because it's just maybe a difference of opinion, but it's when it goes past that and people start upsetting other people, that we know that the conflict's getting out of hand and someone's upset over here and someone's upset over here, and the upsets are both so much that they're polarized like this and they can't come together for consensus, right? So your responsibility in this is only about what you can do to bring yourself to this position and stay in that position and help this other person come to it if needed. So this is how we try and work the skill set together. Okay, so the thing we do here is we go, okay, so 4 techniques that we can use in the moment. The first is to maybe take that person somewhere away from other people, so it's just you and them in a space, because it might be that there's other people around them that are causing the whole situation to get out of hand. It might not be as well, or there's somebody interfering or putting their 50 cents in, and it's causing them to go like this and escalate and raise and get upset, and that's pressuring you, and the whole thing's getting like this, and then there's a third person coming in behind and they're having their piece too. So take that person to a calm and safe space where they feel like they can manage their emotions and you can talk rationally and quietly, because that might be the environment that's triggering them. The second thing you want to do is you want to create a situation where you're listening to them, you're hearing them out, you're giving them some empathy. You might want to ask some questions and apologize if needed. Now, I know people get really weird about apologies. Oh my gosh, they get so weird about apology. I'm just suggesting you say something like, I'm sorry to hear this has happened. I'm sorry we're in this situation. You're not saying I failed and I did the wrong thing, because again, that might not be appropriate, but acknowledging that they're upset. Okay, so I'm sorry this has happened. I'm sorry we're in this situation. Let's try and resolve it. So that's the number 2. Number 3 is allow some silence. Okay? Allow some silence. Right? So the person has a chance to slow down their brain and try and think rationally. The 4th thing to do here is to try and take the emotion out of the situation. So what's actually happening? What is the exact thing that's happening? Not how am I feeling, not how am I responding. What's actually happening in this moment, right? What's happening is we have been given more work to do and everyone has a higher workload, right? There's no emotion there. What's the impact of that? The impact of that is that everyone has more work to do, right? And may need to spend longer at work, right? So what's the situation? What's the impact? And what's the behavior? What's the behavior that you're observing? The person is finding the workload difficult. So we want to separate the emotion out, because we start putting the emotion in as I feel stressed, I feel upset, I feel tired, all of those things. Right? We want to look at what the situation is, the pure situation, bring it back out, pull the emotion out so you can actually look at it independently. Okay, a lot to take in, right? And we've been talking for 28 minutes. So just some real basics. When you're in the situation with somebody and you're trying to bring the conflict to resolution, the first thing you want to do is create some silence, right? Then you want to hear them out, empathize, ask some questions, right? Make sure that you're doing that so that they feel that they're listened to and that they are actually heard, right? Then you want to take the emotion out and describe the situation. Try and describe the situation. When you've got that emotion out of it, try and describe the situation. So acknowledging it and then moving on. There's so much more I could talk about here. I could talk for hours and I see it's nearly 29 minutes. So I'm just going to skip ahead here because I'm aware that there's probably more I can tease out here. And we spent a long time talking about how to manage your own emotions at the start, which is probably really useful. But I've only touched on a small amount of how we can actually resolve the conflict together, or how you can help another person come back to a place where they can communicate effectively with you. Just as a little summary before we finish, I just want to say that after this has happened, and you may have reached some sort of resolution, you may have thanked them, you may have agreed, hopefully, fingers crossed, and there's times where you won't be able to do this because the person's too upset and you need to come back, then you want to make sure you have a debrief and that you look after your mental health. Because if you've gone into a situation where your adrenaline has escalated and your cortisol's gone up, and you keep that there and don't bring it down again, you're going to end up with physical manifestations of a mental health situation, which can be a sore neck, a sore back, stomach issues, weight issues, too much, too little, whatever the case may be. So all of these things can be related to continuing ongoing conflict and escalations in the workplace. Holy heck, that was such a short period of time to talk about something that I usually talk about for 4 or 5 hours. And I might expand on that again at a later podcast, but I hope you've got some good key points out of that, particularly about how to self-de-escalate, remembering the 5 ways to do that, identifying your triggers, making sure you know which amygdala hijack you are slipping into, looking at some calming techniques, empathizing with the other person and finding a place of calm, and then moving into how you work through that with somebody else, creating that silence, making sure you hear them out, empathize with them and ask them some questions, then also looking at how you remove the emotion from the situation so that you can see what the behaviors are, what the situation is, and try and deal with that as opposed to the emotions which you've dealt with in the previous little exercise. And then what do you do afterwards? What techniques do you have in place to support your colleague, to support yourself? Is it EAP? Is it therapy? Is it talking to a colleague? Is it just taking a break so you're not going in from one conflict interaction to another, so that your adrenaline drops down and you can let your cortisol come down too? Holy heck, a lot to consider, a lot to think about. I hope that's been really helpful and useful. And again, I probably should have done 3 podcasts, not 1. But today just felt like the right day for this. Next week, we're going to talk about what to wear to Cup and Show Week, to the races, which is the following week. And there'll be a little bit of a debrief too coming up on my trip to Auckland, which is coming up. I'm going to run a half marathon, which is only my 3rd or 4th one this year. I haven't run one since June, so it's going to hurt. And then I am going to be participating in the Christchurch Spring Fashion Festival in association with New Zealand Fashion Week the following week, which will be great. Anyway, ki kaha everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Please, I'd absolutely love you to share the podcast with somebody else. I would absolutely love you to write a review. It's all of these things that push the podcast ratings up and mean that other people can listen, get knowledge, and also, have some of this information that you're listening to. And I really appreciate you listening. You can follow me on socials, Bright Red NZ on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And I'm increasingly on LinkedIn as well, Stephanie Rumble. So kia ora, ki kaha everybody. Have a wonderful week, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you for listening to the Style for Life podcast. Don't forget, you deserve to feel fabulous at every age, every stage, and at every size. If you're loving the show, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps more amazing people like you find their way back to life through style. Thanks again. Until next time.